Honest facts, dynamic conversations, and powerful financial strategies that will help you craft a blueprint for your future. Welcome to We Money Talk with the founder and CEO of We Alliance Wealth Advisors, Terry Wheeler.
Long-term care. We hear about it, but what are the myths and what are the truths? Do you really need it to start with, too? So, Terry Wheeler, talk to me about long-term care or LTC.
Hello, Patrice. Very nice talking to you today. Long-term care is one of those subjects that really cause people a lot of stress in retirement because they hear all kinds of noise. Some of it is accurate, some of it is wholly inaccurate. So we want to try to get through the myths and talk about really what are the statistics, what is the cost range, and what are the solutions. So hopefully we can just have a big picture overview to kind of get through the noise so people can make an educated decision. And to be frank, without the benefit of hindsight, it's very tough to know what is the optimal solution for each individual. So we just need to know the options, know the facts, have a good idea of each client's resources, and then make the best decision possible. But it's important to make an educated decision and not to be self-insuring by default. And that unfortunately happens too much because the fear and the noise leads to inaction all too often.
Well, it is long-term care. This is for when you end up in a nursing home or need long extended care. What does it cover?
Yeah, so long-term care, there's first of all, to add to confusion, long-term care has a variety of definitions. So, long-term care does include things such as I'm in my home, but I'm starting to need help. So, I need some assistance in the home. And it kind of progresses from something that even your children or spouse or somebody can help you with, all the way to where you need medical skilled individuals, maybe in a nursing facility. And then ultimately, of course, it often leads to hospice toward the very end, which is a different category.
Right.
So it's a range, and I think that's part of what causes the confusion. Is a lot of the early stage of long term care can be done and is traditionally done by family. So you don't need expensive coverage for long term care for that stage typically. So it's really taking a real look at how much time might you spend in each phase and what is the cost for that.
Now, you
Uh,
mentioned family, though. When family is taking care of you, that is taking them away from perhaps a job. So long-term care might benefit them as well.
Absolutely. So part of it, you have to look at family dynamic, and there is a big difference between what happens when the first spouse gets ill versus the second spouse.
Mm.
Uh, it's ironic, but when you buy long term care insurance of any type on an individual, you are in many ways protecting the healthy spouse because you're protecting them from having to be the caregiver. You're protecting them from being perhaps bankrupt by the time the first spouse gets all their long term care taken care of. So if I'm putting long-term care on myself, I'm really protecting Angela and the family so that they have help and they can afford it as opposed to the focus being on me. So yes, I'm benefiting also because I'm getting the care, but you're protecting those that ultimately you're probably leaving behind so that they're in good shape when you leave. Uh,
So who really needs it?
so there's a lot of statistics out there. So give you an example. When you look at the overall population, I wrote down just a few to go over. One is 53% of women will ultimately need some sort of long-term care. For
Hmm.
men, it's only 47%. For women, the average stay is about 3.2 years. For men, it's about 2.2 years. So you listen to that and you're like, okay, roughly 50-50 and maybe 2.5 to 3 years. And then you look at 65-year-olds. Over 70% of 65-year-olds will need long-term care. But then again, you have to look at, well, for how long and what is that cost going to be? That's where I think the confusion and fear is stoked up. So I've got a system that we used called Halo. And what this does is we go through and in about 3 minutes, you create a custom life expectancy analysis. So it's like a life expectancy table, but it also analyzes what is the projected long term care need for an individual based on about 4 or 5 key genetic markers. a handful of activities, or are you a smoker, as an example, is a big one? Do you have heart disease or cancer or Alzheimer's in your family history? And they can give you at least a better range of what you might be facing. So we had a client recently that between the husband and wife, you saw the entire range. So one of the spouses had a projection of 5 to 6 years. The other
Ooh.
spouse had a projection of 1 year.
Ooh.
Complete extremes in the analysis. So, how do you care for who are you protecting there? Well, the spouse that might need 5 to 6 years, if they go first and they need the care first, you're really protecting that healthy spouse because they happen to have about a 5 year longer life expectancy, also. So, they could be broke for their senior years because they had to get bankrupt if they're paying 150,000 a
Mhm.
year for high end long term care. That's the fear factor. Let's talk about the reality. When you delve down deeper, which this report does, their first 5 years was really more on that low level care area. And they were only projected to have 1 year in the very expensive nursing care type scenario. That that means that the healthy spouse, you're probably just taking care of each other. And we think of long-term care as if you're turning your life off to care for your spouse. You're not. In many ways, the early stages of long-term care is pretty routine. They need daycare. You're there together anyway. So it's not that big a deal. If you look at the stats, it's about $70,000 a year is what you're going to be paying for that daycare. Let me get you the California and I'll get you the national average. So for California, you're looking at about $73,216 for home health care. National average is $63,776.
Mm.
Now, this is a scary number for home health care, but you can also, and I would say most people will hire a college student that's a nursing student to come in and they're paying them much lower wages. Sometimes people will simply have a live in roommate, meaning a student or something. So they're there just to keep an eye on them and they get free room and board. Uh, or it's your spouse. So there are all kinds of ways to slice this, but I would say far fewer people are paying $73,216 a year than are. Now, if you're single, alone, and you have to have care, then you are facing a harder uphill battle and there's a higher need for care. I had a discussion. This is a science-based group that we work with, and when I talk to them, I let them know when we look at this, we think that it's built these reports. We think it's built for people selling long-term care. And I told them, and they were quite offended by it, quite frankly. And we're going to have her on a later episode of the podcast. But they said, no, these are the actual numbers if you need care. And I said, yeah, but that's not the reality. People don't spend that kind of money for home health care. And she said, no, they usually have family that helps. And they usually are able to avoid a lot of this. But our report shows you what it would cost if you're outsourcing everything. So part of the myth and reality is understanding what is going to happen by family members and other people. What can you get by with versus what is the top dollar cost if you were to just have somebody provide all your care from the very beginning of need all the way until you need high-end nursing care. Now, before we drop this, the nursing home, which is the other extreme, 146,000 a year is the average in California. 108,405 is the national average. So we are talking about big dollars, but typically people are a year to 2 years at most in the nursing. Not always. We hear horror stories, but that's
Yeah.
typically near the end. So you kind of start with the home health care, then you get more assisted living, which is a little bit higher care, more full time, oftentimes in a facility or a live in, and then you're looking at nursing homes. So it's a range of or progression of long term care need.
So, Terry, what are the types of long term care that are available?
Sure. So long-term care, let's first of all have a discussion about what are the resources for long-term care because
Okay.
in California and other states they get caught into a trap of what is it called? So you have long-term care insurance and then you have critical illness riders. But let's just look at what sources of money are available if you need long-term care and how is that care triggered? So we trigger most benefits for long term care. They look at what's called activities of daily living. Now, activities of daily living is basically all the things we do to take care of ourselves. So it's everything from being able to get in and out of bed, um, your ability to do toileting activities and hygiene, bathing, showering, personal hygiene, eating, and even walking and climbing stairs, being able to get around your house. And of course, we're all familiar with the memory care type issues like for Alzheimer's. So, activities of daily living, most insurance based methods, and even some of the government based methods, they're looking at activities of daily living, and the trigger is typically the inability to perform two of them. So, once that is triggered, it's a matter of, okay, I would qualify. What are my resources? Now, the first one that we look at, and granted, we typically are working with higher net worth individuals that have saved well, they've got a good 401k or good pensions, is we look at self insurance. Can you afford this on your own with a realistic projection of what you're going to need? So let's say the need for an individual, you take the two individuals I described at the two extremes, and let's just put it in the middle, a 2.5 to 3 year need. And let's just say we're going to need about $250,000 to $300,000. And I would say the average is probably going to be over $300,000 for those that are actually needing care. And only about maybe 60% of people over 65 will ultimately need that level of care. Those are very rough numbers. So you got to look at the different sources and you'll see stats kind of all over the board. So self-insurance. Do we have very strong pensions that will cover our needs? And for some of our clients, they're fortunate to still have pensions, even though it's only about 1 in 16 people get pensions
Really?
these days. Some of the retirees now were they worked back in the day where you did get pensions. So they may have very strong pensions between the two of them. And that combined with their savings and 401ks and retirement accounts might be enough. Now, for those, we might do an asset-based approach, which we'll talk about in a few moments also. Uh, and then we have the I have no plan, which now
Hmm.
you're looking at government entitlements. So this is where the government is going to take care of you because you can't afford to take care of yourself. That is going to be a system in California we call Medi-Cal. So it's under the Medicaid system. And this is where they are looking at your resources. And if you qualify, the government pays for you. But as you might imagine, these are not the best facilities. And the bigger the city you live in, the bigger the discrepancy is between a Medi-Cal type facility and a private pay facility. Private pay facilities in many instances are far, far better. So I remember with family members going into long-term care facilities, and you just feel dirty and disgusting being there. It's not a place you ever want to end up. That's your government subsidy type programs. They smell, they're very unpleasant to be there. It's just not. It's a resource if it's what you have to rely on, but it's not where any of us want to end up. And then you have private care, some of which I'm healthy and 55. I could go live at some of these facilities now, and they have so many activities and resources that you need help, but it's like staying at a vacation facility. So there's a wide range. I'll never forget. And this was probably, boy, this is probably 25, 30 years ago. I'm aging myself a bit here. Probably more than that, actually. So I went to San Diego State University in Southern California. And I remember my mom was visiting at one point, and there's a nice area there called La Jolla. And it's a beautiful, beautiful bay. It's a picturesque area. And we're walking around La Jolla, and across the main street, which is a beautiful ocean view location, there was a long-term care facility. And we looked at it and we're like, wow, that's where I want to end up. And my mom turned to me and said, well, whenever you're ready, you can put me there, son. And she was probably in her 40s. So there's a wide range of quality there, but along with it comes a wide range of price tags. So you have the government subsidies. Now let's move on to traditional long-term care. Now, what I'm talking about here is when long-term care got started, it's a monthly payment. So you could pay anywhere from $200 to $500 or even more per month. And you're going to get a certain amount of benefit per day. And often it is for a certain number of years. So you might buy a 3-year policy and it might be for $200 a day, which would give you about 6,000 a month.
Hmm.
Now, 6,000 a month is significantly below maybe 150,000 dollar cost. So why would you only do that? Well, remember with long-term care, you're trying to cover the gap of what you can afford versus what the cost would be. So very often you're just trying to cover enough so you can take care of yourself and you don't have to rely on the kids or somebody to pony up to help you. So for my mom, we did exactly that. We did a policy that was designed to cover the gap. We had a traditional monthly policy and we had a inflation rider, which is great. And we have Alzheimer's in our family, so we did a policy that was lifetime. It is not just for 3 years, just to cover that risk of what if.
Hmm.
So, and she had to do that because she didn't have a lot of assets to do an asset-based approach like a lot of our clients do. So those strategies work. The key is it's a use it or lose it strategy, which a lot of people don't like. You could pay in tens, if not $100,000 and get nothing back, and you have tremendous lost opportunity costs. So the use it or lose it approach is tough because if you don't need it, that's a lot of wealth that was thrown away to
In other
insurance.
words, if you don't use it, the policy doesn't go to your heirs. There's no insurance benefit.
Um, Not in a traditional monthly
Wow.
policy. It simply is gone. So that's done to keep the cost down so that you're doing kind of a pooling of risk so that those that need it, they're getting a benefit as long as they needed it for long enough. Because if they only needed it for a year, year and a half, you're probably better off self-insuring. But if you ended up needing it for 7 years, 10 years, 20
Right.
years, it's probably the best purchase you ever made. So the pooling of risk is designed to have those who don't need it pay for those that do need it. And it's a good concept. It's just a matter of is it the right fit
Mhm.
for a particular client? So a lot of our clients that have built some wealth, we will do some sort of an asset based program. And the key to these is most of them are not use it or lose it. So people really enjoy knowing that they're at least going to get something back or their beneficiaries are
Right.
going to get something back. Now, these come in all kinds of flavors. So, one approach that is done in the life insurance world is they'll have what's called a critical illness rider, and it allows you to accelerate death benefits to pay for long-term care. So that can be an effective approach if life insurance is appropriate and if you're insurable. So that's one area that can work. There's also life insurance hybrid approaches that are almost like an annuity, but it's actually a life insurance chassis that can provide similar benefits. So one approach we like that is kind of a hybrid approach is for somebody like my mom that let's say she had some assets at the time and she was worried about lifetime care. She might be able to put $100,000 down one time and get lifetime care, or maybe do 10 equal payments. And there are policies that will give her lifetime care based on the amount that was put in, her age, and her risk profile. And that can give you care that you cannot outlive. But the benefit of these is if you don't use it, you have a death benefit that gives you all of that money back to your beneficiaries. So the cost here is really lost opportunity cost, meaning that 100,000 may have grown to 200 or 400 or 500,000 before you died. So you do have a lost opportunity cost that can be significant, but at least allows you to put aside some money that is going to be there if you need it for long-term care. And if you don't need it, you're going to get your money back. So I'm giving you a really broad scope. I've got one or two policies in mind, but these approaches are very powerful for the right situation. Uh,
It's
the
determining
one
which
we like,
situation is yours.
yeah, and that really involves really working with your advisor to go through your resources, which is a combination of income and assets. Go through your health history, so doing an analysis to see what are your risks, what is the likely outcome that you might be facing. Learn about the client's experience. So we have clients that have had to be that healthcare provider. and they have strong passions that they don't care if it costs them
Mhm.
a little bit more. They want to make sure that their kids do not have to be caregivers for them. So there's a lot that goes into this. The key is to have the discussion and talk openly and honestly about it, because every single strategy has pros and cons. There is no perfect strategy. There are some that are better than others, but there's definitely, again, without a rearview mirror, there's no perfect strategy, because we need the benefit of hindsight to give you that
Do
strategy.
you have a favorite approach? And if you do, why?
Yeah, so I like asset-based approaches, and the asset-based approach that I described with the forever care, meaning your entire lifetime, that is a good one, and we do use that for some clients. But more often, we'll do an annuity-based approach, and there's a variety of different annuities with riders or contractual provisions that will give you extra benefits. So let's say you're going to start planning for long-term care, but you don't like the use it or lose it approach, and you're concerned about, well, what if I never need it, or what if I need the
Mhm.
money? Well, there are investments out there now where they will give you a multiple of your growth as a benefit for long-term care. So if you put in $50,000 and over time that doubled to 100 and then doubled again to 200, these policies will take that $150,000 gain, they will double it. So now you have a $300,000 gain plus your original 50. So that's 350,000 that they will pay out for long-term care. And the one we like right now is paying out over 7 years. Now, remember, you got to have growth. So we always want to be fair and balanced. And when you're looking at that, this is reliant on your money doubling. So does that take 10 years? Does it take 5 years? Does it take 15 years? It's very important to look at the underlying investment, because ultimately you're buying an investment in this approach. And the goal here is to do better than bond like
Hmm.
returns. So in most of our portfolios, we have a fixed income allocation, and bonds often fits that. This is a great way to take part of that bond allocation, and it also will help cover your long-term care should you need it. Now, some of the reasons why I like this approach: we haven't gotten into the weeds as to how long-term care policies work, but a lot of them have what's called an elimination period, which means I'm in long-term care, but until my 90 days or 6 months or whatever your policy says, until that period is up, I still don't qualify for collecting benefits. Well, this approach has zero elimination period. As soon as you are certified, 2 activities of daily living you cannot get or you cannot do, you get the benefit. Now, a lot of policies, again, in the weeds, you got to produce receipts and you got to show that you're being cared for, perhaps in a facility, and maybe you want to be cared for at your home. Well, those policies are very hard to collect your benefits. It's like climbing a mountain constantly during the entire long-term care situation. A good policy doesn't do that. And in this approach, if you qualify, you get a check every year for 7 years. So 1/7 of that money is paid out. And quite frankly, it doesn't matter if you're using the money or not. If you don't use the money, you put it into your portfolio. It's a collected benefit. You qualify, you get it no matter what. It is not use it or lose it. So, what I mean by that is, let's say you are statistically average. By the time you go into long term care, you're there less than 2 years. You got 7 years of payments. Those next 5 years continue to be paid out for your surviving spouse or children or whoever your beneficiaries are. So once you trigger the benefit, you or your family is going to get it. So that's creating extra liquidity and extra pool of money right when you need it. So we love that approach because it's a great long-term care approach if you have time on your side, meaning you got to plan early. So I'm 55. We're doing this strategy, but we don't think we'll need it hopefully for 30 years. Well, in 30 years, hopefully my money has doubled 2, 3, maybe even 4 times. So even $50,000 investment for my wife and I each is probably going to be enough to cover our long-term care. So it just depends on how optimistic you are on your projections and how good the underlying investment is.
And you're reading my mind. I was thinking, at what age did you really start thinking about this?
So again, it's a little bit of a loaded
Okay.
question because this strategy, quite frankly, I think somewhere in that 50 and above is a perfect age to start it. Now, if you're 70 and healthy, it's still a great strategy because even if you're only going to have enough time to double your money once, that's still going to give you a lot of extra resources for your long-term care. Um, One of the strategies we do right now is offering a 20% bonus also, which means when you put in $100,000 into this, you've got 120,000 right out of the gate. And then if that doubles over 10 or 15 years or whatever it takes, the 120 becomes 240.
Hmm.
And then of course that's 140,000 of gains, which is doubled and then paid out over the 7 years. So there's ways to use leverage, and that's something that we like to use. Now, the best part about this, I think, for most of our clients is it overcomes that fear of, well, what if I don't even need this? Well,
Yeah.
based on today's crediting rates, you should beat bond returns pretty handily. So it's a bond-like investment. And it's going to be plus or minus a few percent, meaning if it underperforms very slightly, big deal. If it overperforms very slightly, great. If it does what it would do, what the historical numbers say based on today's crediting rates, you're going to be absolutely thrilled. So you've got to be very mindful of the actual investment, but it's an investment that if you just walk away in 10 years, you should hopefully do better than bonds. That's the goal. And it therefore has a very solid place in your portfolio with or without the long-term care benefit. In fact, this particular investment we will do for clients without any long-term care benefits at all, just as a bond alternative. So if you need long-term care, though, the rider that gives you this benefit is great. Now, another benefit of this is this particular one also doubles your gains and pays it out over 5 years for your beneficiaries. So if you pass away and you never needed it, your family is very well taken care of. And we like spreading it out over 5 years because it spreads the tax bill out over 5 years. So we can do it at lower brackets. So we're always bringing tax planning into the mix. Um, so I think we covered most of what I wanted to hit on from there. I think one important thing I did leave out is, and I sort of mentioned it, but in long-term care, we mentioned in the beginning that a lot of times family is providing the help. Well, when these policies pay out, family can be the caregiver. So you can use some of that money if
Hmm.
maybe you have somebody in your family that is working part-time and now they're going to help you, you can replace their income. So it's completely up to you. You're in control of your own checkbook. You're getting that payment and you decide, are you going to be cared for in your home? Are you going to be in an assisted living, a nursing care facility? Are you going to have family help you? It is completely up to you. So it really kind of keeps your dignity intact because you're the decision makers. And if maybe you have Alzheimer's or something where you're not competent and you've got helpers that are making your decisions, they're empowered to make the best decisions for you. And they're not a slave to the terms of a monthly benefit contract, which there's so many nightmare stories about those. They have gotten better, I will say. So monthly can be a good solution. You just got to make sure you know what you're getting into, and the
Right.
devil is in the details. So your advisors or yourself, you need to
Right.
actually read those contracts uh, and make sure you have a good one. So it's worth it to work with a professional in this area for sure.
And with that in mind, Terry, how can people reach you? Because this is a topic that it hits home for a lot of people with elderly relatives.
Yeah. Yeah, it's with aging of America, this is unfortunately going to be front and center in everybody's lives because you are either part of the generation that maybe is facing this in the near term, or you're part of the generation that's going to be a
Hmm.
caregiver. So you can reach us, of course, at our website. So that should be down in the show notes, but it's www.weria advisors.com. And of course, our phone number at the office here is 916-325-0130. You can always give us a call, and Chris is our client service coordinator. She'll get you set up for a complimentary initial appointment. Um, but just submit questions. So our email addresses are there. You can always just shoot me a question or two if you've got it. We're happy
All
to help.
right. Well, don't wait. Sooner you start thinking about this, better it is for you and for your family. But follow this podcast to know when the latest show is ready for you with also great information. And of course, share it with others, especially those in your family. Thanks for being with us.